not until 7:15.
Right.
I thought we started at 6:30. Chris, you said you were late?
I try to be early so that I can
It's like,
be prepared.
that's
Yeah.
good.
All right, so I do believe we're live streaming at this moment, so I think we're ready to go.
Yes, your staff was also late, so
Oh, okay, great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us at 6:30 today. We're going to try a new meeting time. Normally we meet at 7 o'clock, so this is new for us too. So I will go ahead and start off with the agenda with the packet that's come along with the meeting. Number one is to call to order and confirmation of quorum. So.
I don't think we have a quorum.
1, 2, 3,
yes, we only need 6 and we've got 7.
5, 6, 7. Yeah.
So Chris, if I can just quick do the roll, then we'll have that on the record and be squared away. Chris Austin,
Present.
Frank Casadante,
Here.
Lisa Frazier called and said she had a family emergency, so she will not be here tonight.
Oh no. Okay.
Chris Johnston.
Here.
Elise Polly,
Here.
Jeff Scott,
Here.
Cooper Schultz,
Here.
Jen Sykes,
Here.
and Scott Taylor, not yet. But that is definitely a quorum.
Perfect. Okay, we'll go on to item number 2, agenda changes and approval. Any issues with the agendas? Okay, hearing none.
We can just go with consensus.
Okay, all right, just want to make sure.
Saves time.
Okay, and then the minutes review. Minutes from the regular meeting from May 20th, which feels like a lifetime ago, and July 15th, which was a lot more recent. Does anyone have any concerns, comments? Did they not sound professional in the meeting notes or the meeting minutes? They want to argue about it or anything along those lines? No? All right, I think we all got a pop-up just now saying that the meeting is being recorded. So just a heads up for everyone.
Now, can I motion to approve all the meeting minutes, or do I need to do May?
Yep.
And motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Perfect, I've got a
Second.
motion and a second. A motion from Mr. Schultz and a second from Sykes.
Jen Sykes,
Aye.
Cooper Schultz,
Aye.
Jeff Scott,
Aye.
Elise Polly,
I,
Chris Johnston,
Aye.
Lisa Frazier's not here, sorry. Getting adjusted. Frank Casadante,
Aye.
Chris Austin.
Aye.
And that's unanimous, thank you.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and march forward on 4A. So the special use permit modification for that medical building office at 2800 Old NC 86 regarding their ramp. So I think we actually have the developer here just being let in right now. So Margaret, do you want to give us a quick run through and then we'll get going?
Sure. So based on the names that I'm seeing, Thorne is here as a representative of the owner, and I'm not exactly sure who's here from the design team. I think Jeremy was going to be out of the office, but we'll soon. Oh, no, it's Jeremy.
I'm here. I changed my name.
So both are here. There's been no further changes after the public hearing. Again, this was to grant a waiver to accommodate a field modification to install an ADA accessible door and ramp on the non-street and non-primary pedestrian facade of the building due to some grading issues that happened during construction. And we had the public hearing in July. There were no public comments beyond those from the applicant. And I don't think staff has anything further to add.
Okay. So applicants, do you guys have any additional information to bring forward or anything along those lines, or are we pretty square where we are?
No, we weren't planning on presenting anything else.
Okay.
Here to answer any questions you may have.
Wonderful. So with that, would the board have any questions for the applicants regarding the field modifications and the request, the waiver request? Questions, comments, concerns? Jeff, yeah, go for it.
I just had a question about, maybe it's a question for Margaret. With the TRC that you guys are working on, the Technical Review Committee, is how do you, I think we've talked about it before, but it feels like forever ago, but how do you guys see, issues like these? I know that was something you guys were going to tackle, to kind of get rid of the waivers, but how do you guys see that kind of operating in these types of instances?
Well, this was a modification that happened during construction that we were not advised of. We might have been able to handle it if we had gotten a heads up in advance. There might have been a way to work through it, but things happen, and I'm not trying to blame the applicant or make them look bad in any way, shape, or form. That the things happen, and they happen on every construction site. We hope that we can build some sort of flexibility in to address these sort of situations in the future if we take waivers away. For this specific circumstance, I'm not exactly sure what we would come up with, and that'll be a good bulk of our conversation tonight as we move through those things. But I think, I hate to harp on it, but I think if we had known before they did it, we probably could have found a way to get them there, or be within the 10% flexibility that staff can grant. And, things happen, and I get that. It is one of, I think, the hesitations that all staff have about getting rid of waivers.
Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. I think, I guess we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I know that, on a construction site, stuff moves fast. Contractors don't want to stop regardless. So I'm kind of curious, how we, adhere to the rules, but also be, helpful to, the owners and that kind of thing, so.
Elise?
I have a question, and again, starting this with acknowledging that things happen, things shift. It's hard to predict all of the things that'll come up. But my understanding of it was that first there was an accessible ramp that was put in one way, and it was determined that it actually needed to be put in the other way. And as a result, there's a lot of space now that could be used otherwise, that could have landscaping that would be nicer, but there's just a lot of hardscape now. And my understanding is that at this point, only one of those ramps needs to be there instead of two. And I'm remembering this from about a month ago, so happy to be corrected. But I just have to ask, what would be involved in adding landscaping to the ramp that doesn't need to be there? I mean, I'm sure it would cost some money, but I just need to ask because, it's a part of our town's plans to have a certain amount of landscaping with these different places around town. And so curious to hear thoughts on what would be involved in having some more landscaping and less hardscape.
I'll let Jeremy correct me if I'm wrong, but if I believe the only way you could get landscaping would be to actually jackhammer out a whole lot of concrete and then bring in new fill and so forth. So unless the board was willing to accept, planters over the portion of the ramp that isn't particularly needed right now, I think you're talking about a fairly significant, demo and then bringing in dirt and planting situation.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if I could add to that, Jeremy Anderson, CJT. Yeah, that is correct. It could be done. It would be, it'd be money to jackhammer out the concrete, remove the handrail. I don't know if this helps to share my screen. Yeah, why don't I do that if you don't mind?
And Jeremy, we're not talking about just 4 inches of concrete. We're talking about like a foot.
That's what I was. Yeah, I brought the
concrete.
picture up here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, it would be, again, just to clarify, you are correct. This ramp on this side of the door was installed first. We thought that was going to satisfy the requirement. And unfortunately, the door swing, which was already put in, swung the other way and will actually be in the way of the ramp. Thus, we had to build a ramp out the other side. So a lot of expense went to build it. Nobody wanted to do it. And I'll just make the point, I didn't even think about it when the question was asked to me. It was in the, exchange of construction, and I was not aware we were violating something. So I just want to be clear, wasn't trying to get around something and hope no one would catch it. Just wasn't aware it was violating something. But yeah, it would require removing the railings, fair bit of expense involved with that. And just to clarify, I'm not sure, and Tom was the one that pointed it out, I'm not sure that removing the ramp that doesn't serve any purpose, which I presume is this side here, actually solves the issue, because the issue is we don't have landscaping between these parking spaces and the building. So this ramp is the one that's the violation. This one, because it actually has landscaping out here, may still have been okay. It's this one here that created nothing but hardscape between the parking and the building. That, it's my understanding, is the real issue.
You're correct, Jeremy. It's the space between, from about where it says 6/19/23 on the plan to where it says 6/18/40 is where the landscaping needs to be. And that's not where the now surplus ramp is.
That's right.
And Jeremy, this is Thorne with Flagship. Hello, everyone. I'm apologizing. I'm having some trouble getting my camera to turn on. I'm not seeing myself, so I don't think you can see me, but hopefully you can hear me. First, I do want to apologize, for that this wasn't caught and brought to your attention during the construction. I think two things. I would just want to point out that the ramp, I guess, going to the left of the door, it is functional and people can use it. So it's not that it doesn't entirely serve any purpose. It's not purposeless. It's just that I think we had to do it the other way for code compliance because of the way the door swings. Correct, Jeremy?
That is correct.
And then also we did, understanding that it's not in compliance with the original intent of the code, we did take the landscaping that would have gone there and planted it. I think those are those small shrubs that you're seeing
here
adjacent to the, yeah.
Yeah, they were not eliminated, they were moved.
Right.
But
at least
I dare say most people use this side of the ramp anyway. Still, it was just, again, a code compliant door swing thing that we needed the other one.
It is the, more, it is the easier route to the door. So I would bet if you videotaped it, that's what most people are using, even though you do have to kind of work your way around the door when it's open.
Elise, does that clarify for you that we're talking about the far end one instead of the closer one?
Yeah, it's helpful to have this clarification. And so I heard that the planting was moving, and I see these 3 plants over here. So is the total amount of plants the same as it would have been had the original plan gone through?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
we took, and you only saw 3 or 4 in the picture there. We took the plants that were right here and just moved them over here. We didn't delete them. So again, there was some plants right in this little area here before, and we just moved them to probably increase this bed. Or maybe we moved them at the end, I'm not sure, but we didn't delete them. I know that. The contractors moved them around.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Frank?
Yeah, is there a calculation for how much impervious surface was added versus what was expected? I mean, I guess obviously that was all going to be landscaping and soil. So instead it's now concrete. Is there a calculation? I mean, we could calculate it and we don't have to do it right now, but.
Yeah, I think, Frank, it's probably 40 feet by 5. So what's that, 200 square feet?
100 square feet of impervious surface added.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any excess to give?
We had some excess in the pond. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We always have a fair, amount in the calculations to buffer, small additions like this. So yeah.
Okay. So you're not over it?
No.
Okay.
Good question, Frank. Thanks. Anyone else? Jen?
And just to clarify, this door is you have to have it ADA compliant because it's a hospital, but it's an exit door not really used.
That's correct. It's the, just keep moving around here. It's the, so here's the overall site. It's this rear door here. It is not an entry for the public. I think staff maybe will enter it, but mostly it's a staff entrance and exit for further parking back here. All the public entry is up here.
Okay, Scott. Yeah, Frank, go for it.
Is that door operated remotely, Jeremy? Is there a push bar to get out, or is there a switch? Since it's ADA compliant, I would assume it on the inside and the outside.
Yeah, maybe Thorne can speak to it. I know it has, magnetic locks, which was part of the reason why it couldn't be switched on the hinge because of all the electronics within the door.
Right.
But Thorne, maybe you know how it operates more functionally.
Sorry, I was on mute. Unfortunately, I don't know the details beyond what you know, Jeremy, and that it was fairly expensive. It wasn't as simple as we all thought to just kind of flip the door. So that's why we made the decision with the ramp.
Back to the picture. I don't know if the picture shows if there's anything on it. I think there's.
That's an HID badge reader. Is that what that is?
Yeah, I think that's a key fob access, and then you see it says staff entrance only on it.
So you have the electronics for the security system as well as for the fire, I assume, system. The loss of power, it'll release after so many hours without power. So you're saying all that was integral to the door?
Yeah,
I believe you're correct. Yes.
Okay. But no, if it was ADA, so I guess it's only ADA from the employees. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not a patient entrance at all. It's just required ADA for an emergency staff or a rear secondary staff exit.
Yeah, I understand. Is it left hinged, right hinged? So it hinged left.
It hinges in this view. The hinge is on the left side.
All right.
Yeah. So it swings here, and that blocked this ramp, if you can understand. So thus we had to build a ramp on this side. So the swing this way allows you to come out to the right.
Right. Okay.
And it did have to be a ramp. The architect, that was the first question, because a set of steps, which we would have originally had here, would have been very easy to just incorporate and not lose any landscaping. But they told us it had to be ADA, thus the extensive ramps were put in. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Jen?
And just to clarify, more of a staff question, the landscaping requirement is more shrubs and things that low rooted or things that won't be like a tree where you need a lot of deep roots and it's surrounded by concrete. It's more flowers and bushes which could take root pretty easily.
Right. The ordinance just says that there should be a 5-foot landscaped area between parking and the building. There's no requirement. They've met their shade requirements and other things. So this is just what they have is definitely adequate and meets the ordinance and the intent. And it would be really what we would expect to see.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for the applicant or the waiver requester? Okay. So Margaret, to call out in the packet, you mentioned that staff is not convinced the benefit to the community is greater than the cost to the applicant to correct the issue. So just to confirm, you don't believe that anything should be changed in order to address this? A waiver is an appropriate response.
Right. That's just a fancy way of saying that staff is not opposed to the waiver.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any questions, or are we ready to move on? Ready to move on. Okay. Great. All right. Having no other questions, I think at this point, let me find my little notes here. At this point, we are all set with 4A, we need some sort of closure on it, though, don't we?
You need a motion to either recommend for or against the modification to the town board, yes.
Okay. Does anyone want to take a stab?
I'll motion for.
Okay, Hooper? Oh, that's the motion. Oh, okay. We need-
Second.
All right.
I'm assuming that's a motion in favor of granting the waiver and approving the application?
Yes, that's correct. Motion.
There we go.
That was my assumption when I said second.
I heard
I
4A.
wasn't clear.
Great. Chris Austin.
Aye.
Frank Casadante,
Aye.
Chris Johnston,
Aye.
Elise Polly,
Aye.
Jeff Scott,
Aye.
Cooper Schultz,
Aye.
Jen Sykes,
Aye.
and I see Scott Taylor has joined us.
Aye.
Thank you. That's unanimous.
All right, Jeremy and Thorne, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if you have any other issues, let us know.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you. Have a good night.
You as well. Bye. All right, that moves us along to 4B, text amendments. Yeah, it's happening. Text amendments. So 4B1, section 3.8.11, to specify mailed, published, and posted notice required for evidentiary hearings. Margaret, you want to give a quick update?
Sure. Simply in rewriting the ordinance, we missed the need for, I believe it was the posted notice for evidentiary hearings. And so we wanted to get that changed and corrected as quickly as possible so that we're compliant with state law. And I asked the town board to go ahead and send that to the public hearing in July, back at their workshop in June. And we conducted the public hearing and there were no public comments. So staff would ask that you would approve this text amendment.
And just in case you want to review, it's on page 29 of your packet. So the part in highlighted yellow, but.
Yes, did anyone notice that I actually put page numbers in your agenda packet this time? Finally figured it out and finally remembered.
All right, does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns about the update? All right, failing to hear, oop. Okay, all right, Frank, you threw me there with the unmute. All right, failing to hear anything, does anyone have a motion for this? Or do we want to do them as a group?
I thought we could do it as a group on this.
Okay. All right, then the second amendment is 4B2, section 9.1.5.2 to allow single family residential HVAC and auxiliary power supplies in setbacks.
Correct. And this one, the board had actually talked about, I believe, back in March, and we finally got it on the July public hearing. Just basically to fully allow any HVAC or auxiliary power supply for a single family residential use to not necessarily have to observe the standard setbacks. We have found a number that there are a number of places where that can't happen without households having to completely redo all of their ductwork and so forth, which seems a little onerous, and but maintaining the requirement for the non-residential or multifamily ones to meet the setback to continue to address the noise, which is why this requirement was made in the first place. So again, no public comments at the hearing, and staff would ask that you recommend approval of this text amendment.
Okay. Does anyone have any additional thoughts, comments, concerns? All right, hearing none. I think we've talked about both our text amendments now. So now we need a motion on both our text amendments now.
Motion to approve both text amendments as written.
Chris Austin with the motion, Jen with the second. Thank you, Chris. Jen.
Okay, Scott Taylor,
Aye.
Jen Sykes,
Aye.
Cooper Schultz,
Aye.
Jeff Scott,
Aye.
Elise Polly. Are you going to let your auxiliary helper vote?
Did you see he was nodding? Aye. We all say aye over here.
Great.
That's
Chris
where that goes.
Johnston
Aye.
and Frank Casadante
Aye.
and Chris Austin.
Aye.
Great, that is unanimous. Thank you much.
Perfect. All right, we have moved out of the recommendations to the discussion. So 5, the Unified Development Ordinance text amendments. So let's jump into it. So section 7.5.3, setbacks for non-conforming lots. Let's see here. Let me find the page. That would be on page 31 for those of us following along at home. Margaret?
And so if folks find this easier to understand, if I share, I'm more than happy to do that. But we talked
mind?
some at I'm sorry,
Would you mind, Margaret?
I can.
Just so we're all on the same page.
Take me a minute.
Literally.
So I think at the last round of hearings, we did some discussion about non-conforming lots and so forth, but then we also had the issue come up in front of the Board of Adjustment about a variance or see, this is going to prove whether or not I can do two things at once. A variance or other requests for setback relief related to, can folks see the agenda packet?
Yes.
Okay, so now we'll get to. And so this is the way the language reads now, that, and there's just a couple of places where we weren't very careful with the words that we chose. Here it says, provided, however, no setback should ever be less than 10 feet, which is a little bit permissive. And then cumulative setbacks so that they are the same length, and that sounds like it's fairly required. The should and the shall is a little bit squishy there. And so after in listening to what the Board of Adjustment ruled and making their interpretation, staff would like to document that in the ordinance, and then also saw an opportunity to combine two sections. And so we are suggesting that we get specific that this section would apply to a single non-residential lot created before the date that we worry about, which is September 17th, 1986, which is basically when the town took over zoning. We also have a provision that allows the division of lots when multiple houses were built on a single lot, and that creates non-conforming lots. And then folks often in the two situations in 1 and 2 want to make minor adjustments to their lots and still end up with non-conforming lots. So suffice it to say that the town of Hillsborough has a number of non-conforming lots. If I'm not mistaken, I think once did the math and it was like 40%. So then we're saying that we're changing a should to a shall to make sure that the combined, particularly the side setback, but really none of the setbacks shall ever be less than 10 feet. And then allow the flexibility that if a homeowner is in a situation where their side setbacks, say when they do the 40% math or 50% math as relevant, their setbacks are come out to 12 feet on each side. Well, they could choose to set 10 on one side, but then their other side setback is going to become 14, so that they're still added together as 24. And so they can choose to do that. But then once they do that, and we note that in the file, they can't come back and get the other 4 feet on the other side of the lot, if that makes any sense. But then this then also allows us to get rid of the narrow lot, because we're talking about lots that are non-conforming due to area or width. And so this just is codifying an interpretation by the Board of Adjustment that addresses a number of situations in town. Did that make sense for people?
Show of hands, did it make sense?
Yeah, but I was in the Board of Adjustment hearings, so
I'm gonna go ahead and, my hand was up, I didn't actually mean it. I'm sorry, I'm taking it back.
So the case, and Margaret, correct me if I'm getting this one wrong, was the one in the ETJ where the woman had the porch that was like a foot off, and the idea was that because it's Board of Adjustment, without this interpretation, this woman was looking at some pretty expensive repairs to make up something like 3 feet. But this interpretation, she met the setback requirements when you look at it cumulatively, is what this is getting at. And it was 3 feet. We didn't think the neighbors were going to care. It was like a porch awning. So it's a way to grant some flexibility for folks. In her case, she was talking about it had been added on to help address aging in place. So it's a way to also think about some of the town goals with sustainability aging in place. But the use case was, it was a way to help a homeowner not have to pay a lot of money to fix something that was already there.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this particular case was a case where the homeowner had done some work to their house without getting the proper permits on the front end some time ago. I don't want to say that they just did it.
No,
It was actually, I think, repairing some storm damage from who knows how long ago. And we weren't able to prove it. They weren't able to prove it. And so,
yeah,
an alternative would have just been to call it a day and say it was an existing nonconformity, but the owner kind of presented themselves to us and said, here, I've done this, I need you to fix it, because they were looking to sell their property and needed to get their documents correct.
Yeah, it was well over a decade or two repair.
Okay.
I have a question.
Frank? You're muted, Frank. Okay, wait. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it would benefit me, and I don't want to tie up the whole group, if we could go through just an example, and to make sure I understand 7.5.4 in the table, like for something like, let's just choose R10, like the setbacks. So I really thought I understood it, and now I'm not quite so sure, Margaret. So the side setbacks on R10, are they?
The standards, and let me just first ask, because I realized I went and did something else. So can you guys still see my screen, or what are you
Yes.
seeing? Sorry.
Yes.
I don't usually share screens, so I forgot about that. Apologize. So yes, the side setbacks in 15, the standard setbacks are 15 feet. And so in the case, and a lot in R10 is supposed to be 75 feet wide. And so say you have a 50-foot lot, and then you apply the 15-foot setbacks, it's going to be a wider percentage of the lot. And so we say, no, you can take the 50 lot width, multiply by 0.4 to find out what your cumulative setbacks are, and then divide by 2. And that's what you should put on both sides, but we're going to give you the chance to wiggle your house where you want to, as long as neither side is ever less than 10.
Okay.
So you could set one, and that may come up in a case of, again, of an existing house that's not built in the center of the lot, because not every house is built in the center of the lot. And maybe that house is already at 10 feet. And then how do you do the math on the other side to figure out how much space they can have? And so actually the way the Board of Adjustment has interpreted it gives just a hair more flexibility, and allows the town to maintain its, what some people call, more quirky style of every lot not being exactly the same, with the house slapped in the middle, and so on and so forth. It allows for a little bit more individuality, lets you respond to whatever you've got going on in your lot. Maybe you've got a large tree that you're trying to save, and giving that flexibility can be helpful.
Okay, can I play this back to you to make sure I understand? So in the example you gave, say we have a 50-foot width for an R10 lot. So non-conforming, because it's short by 25 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So on the side-to-side setbacks, 40% of that 50 is, I guess it's gonna be 20 feet, right? And that 20 feet, I have to have at least 20 feet of side setbacks. So could it be?
That's cumulative. So you're supposed to take that 20 and divide by 10. And so in that case, you're already going to be at 10 on both sides. But let's say the lot was 60 feet wide, and you do the 0.4, and then it's 24 feet is your cumulative setback. So that would tell you, if you divided it evenly, 12 feet on both sides.
Okay.
But maybe your house isn't built in the center. You
That's
have got
right.
an existing house, maybe it's not built in the center, or maybe you haven't built the house yet and you want your driveway to be to be more on one side or something. You could set the house at 10 feet on one side, but then the other setback has to be 14. So that again, added together, they're 24.
Yeah.
Or you could just put your house in the middle and have 12 on both sides, or anything in between.
But you can't exceed, so I can't be 8 on one side.
No. Mm-mm.
Right. Okay.
Unless you already were, unless the house was built prior to that 1986 date and you already were, then we would just do the math on the other side.
Thank you. Okay, that clarifies things for me. Right.
Okay. Elise?
That was a helpful exercise. Thank you, Frank. I'd say, given the statistic that Margaret started us out with, that around 40% of lots are non-conforming, I think having more flexibility around this is going to be really helpful. So from everything I'm hearing, this sounds like it makes a lot of good sense.
And again, really the request tonight is just to authorize this to go to your next public hearing.
Right. Okay. So because this is just a discussion, though, we're just discussing whether or not it should go to the next public hearing, not that we need to vote or do any kind of motion or anything along those lines.
You do actually need to vote to send it to public hearing. Staff can't just put things on your public hearing agenda. You guys have to authorize that.
One of these days, I'm going to get that right. Okay. All right. So does anyone have any additional questions on this particular discussion point?
Maybe for the public discussion, it would be helpful to have just a couple of examples that we could put up for the public.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And we'll pick ones that actually work really well. So yeah, and we might do one of uneven sides and so forth, because not every lot is nice and square and so forth, and just explain it out a little bit more. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Okay. So I need someone to.
I motion that we send to public hearing.
Second.
Okay, got a motion from Elise and a second from Hooper.
Scott Taylor,
Aye.
Jen Sykes,
Aye.
Hooper Schultz,
Aye.
Jeff Scott,
Aye.
Elise Polly,
Aye.
Chris Johnston,
Aye.
Frank Casadante,
Aye.
Chris Austin.
Aye.
Great, that is unanimous. Thank you.
All right, so planning board member Polly's motion has passed unanimously with more than the votes that we had, I think. I want to take just a very brief second to say, so Frank, thank you very much for your question, your clarification. None of us has all the knowledge about what's going on here. So all these clarifying questions are only for our benefit. So if anyone else has any kind of question, or if something doesn't make sense, let's take a moment and actually just figure it out, because I'd rather us do it that way than just move forward and not know what we're talking about. So Frank, thank you very much. If anyone else has any questions, let's definitely knock those out beforehand. So let's go ahead then and move on to the next discussion point, which, if we look, is preliminary discussion. What amendments are needed to Section 6 to allow removal of waivers? This is the fun one.
This is
Margaret?
the fun one. I see Shannon turned her camera back on. I'm not gonna throw it to her unless she says she really wants to take it, because I wrote the agenda item. But if she wants to take it, I do have dinner sitting here that I could eat.
You too.
I was just going to provide some context, introduce the item. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, you're in a echoey area, but it's still, we can hear you pretty well.
That's my laptop.
Oh, gotcha.
So I don't know, Margaret, if you've discussed with the planning board some of the issues that we're having with waivers yet?
I think if we did, it was some time ago. So why don't you do that, and I will get a few spoonfuls in, and then I will jump in as we start walking through it. How's that sound?
That sounds good to me. So for some context, and I'm glad that we were able to look at a waiver tonight. And I think Jeff asked a really good question. So what we're seeing happen a little bit with the waivers is they're supposed to be a tool that we use to provide flexibility and to be nimble. And it's starting to be, that tool is starting to be weaponized a little bit and overused and abused in some instances. And I'm not saying that that's what happened with the earlier applicant. Things do happen during construction, but we have had a few instances when we're in the field and we see that something's not being done to the plan. And so we ask like, hey, why aren't you building this to the plan? And they're like, oh, we don't even know where the plan is. We're just going to build it and like ask for a waiver later, or we're just gonna. And these similar conversations are happening with developers even before projects come in. They'll be like, well, we don't want to build it this way. We'll just ask for a waiver. Well, that's not exactly what the intent of waivers was. It was designed to be a flexibility thing, not a, we'll just build whatever we want and ask the board. And so that's kind of the issue that we're having a little bit, and that's happening at the TRC level. It's happening in the field. So we're trying to figure out a way that we can have a flexible enough UDO without having to do the waivers. The other thing that I'm a little nervous about is I don't think it's necessarily fair to boards to ask them to grant exceptions for certain things, for certain uses. And so that's come up too. So developers have said things to me like, well, if the town wants this thing, we'll use like a Starbucks, right? Because this hasn't actually happened. Well, if the town wants the Starbucks really badly, they'll just let us build it the way that we want to build it and grant our waivers. So that's kind of my just very honest intro of kind of what's happening behind the scenes and why we're talking about trying to get rid of waivers, is that what we want to do is we want to have a really strong ordinance that has really good guidelines that tells a developer or an applicant what we want, how we want it to look, and has enough flexibility that we don't have to go through the waiver process. And hopefully I kind of covered all of that. And again, I don't want to make it sound, developers aren't like, evil. They're not like looking for a loophole all the time, but you do kind of get some here and there. And they get into patterns, right? So like we've been doing waivers, I think for at least 5 or 6 years, if not longer. And so designers just get used to the ability to be able to ask for it. And so if something happens on the fly in construction, what should happen is that you take a pause and you say, hey, we need to make a major change. Let's reach out to planning. Let's call Margaret, let's call Shannon, let's call Tom and see what we need to do, instead of just marching on and asking later if what you did is going to be workable. So just want to provide some context. We don't want to get rid of waivers because they're, just kind of not generally working. And we have worked with the Board of Adjustment. I know Tom King is their staff person, kind of explaining more to them, like when someone asks for a waiver, we should be pushing them on it more. Don't just grant it because it's asked, but try to make sure that there's like a really good justification, because sometimes it's like, there's topography here that we really just can't work with. Like it's impossible to deal with this situation. But there's also some that are just coming up because they don't feel like doing it. So I don't know if I've framed that in the best way, but Margaret, did you get enough to eat? Do you want to go into some of the other things that we're asking about? Oh, and I think the first thing we're going to talk about a little bit is density with housing. This is something that's come up a lot. And I think Margaret summarized it, but I keep getting the same response from multifamily developers when they go in and they ask me, why can I, no matter how I shake this out, I can only get about 9 units per acre, which if you have 4 acres means you can build like 36 apartments, which isn't very much. And land is very expensive. And so I think the way that we were getting around that previously was with those special use districts. And with 160D, we don't have that anymore. So we need to figure out a way, unless we're never going to build any more apartments ever again, because the land is too expensive. You'll only be able to get 9 units per acre. I'll kind of turn it over to Margaret.
Right. And so luckily I did have an intern this summer and had them go back through kind of the history of special use permits that we had to find the sections that were most often where we had the most waiver requests. And I had done that a number of years ago, but it was great to get this updated and then kind of consolidated it. And so and then I put them in order as they appear in the ordinance in your packet. And so the first one, of course, is the dimensional requirements, whether it's the setbacks, the lot size, or the building height. And while I'm not anxious to, lot sizes was most often used in the residential special use district just to create more residential options on smaller detached lots. There are other ways to address that. We can address that through conditional zoning. We can do other things. So I don't think that's where I want to focus the waiver request on. Building height almost never comes up, so I don't really want to spend too much time on that. But the density, the number of units per acre, does come up in nearly every attached housing, whether it's an apartment complex or townhome development. Townhomes, actually, I'll back up a little bit. So when I started 30 years ago, the ordinance allowed 6 units an acre. And through a rewrite at some point, we upped it to 9 units an acre. And you have a table in your packet of what the various apartment and townhome neighborhoods have shaken out at over the last 20 years or so. And really, the couple things that I can remember about apartments in terms of kind of rules of thumb, you need 100 units minimum to generate enough activity where the owner has on-site management nearly every day. For those apartment complexes we have with smaller than 100 units, those are the ones where we have the issues because there's not management on site all the time to answer questions, to be responsive to maintenance requests, those kinds of things. So I am a big proponent, as much as I would love to see, scattered small apartments. The market's really going to build complexes, unfortunately, by and large. And so you need to get that 100 units. So then you've got to get closer to 12 or 16 units an acre to make it work on the parcels that we have, especially when you throw in, the amount of parking that we require, which is actually a little bit more than some apartment complexes would like to build. Folks might remember going through that with Kate's Creek Apartments. And so what I would like to suggest that the board at least think about is that you also remember that we recently changed multifamily or attached housing to be allowed by right without, so a staff level site plan. So, I mean, that's a big change that we still haven't really seen the impact of. But if the board would be comfortable changing the density in the multifamily district to something like 12 or 16 units an acre, and then create a possibility for those folks that are building affordable housing to come in and automatically get a 20% density bonus, that's a huge incentive for affordable housing because they're still getting the staff level approval, and they're getting a density bonus. And I wouldn't want it to just be, oh yeah, we're building affordable housing. Prove to us how it's going to be affordable. Show us that you're participating in the state tax credit program. Show us that you have some way to buy down the cost of your project so that it's truly going to be affordable to those that are at least at 80% of area median income, which is the traditional across the board threshold for what's affordable. Is you take the median income for a family of 4, 80% of that is kind of the upper threshold of affordable housing. And so those mechanisms keep the affordable housing affordable for 20 years and sometimes longer. If it's money that's coming through the county governments, it's a permanent affordability requirement. If it's the tax credit program is only 20 years, but most often those complexes cycle through and get repurchased by another affordable agency. And maybe it's not as guaranteed that they stay affordable forever. because we did have one cycle out to become market rate, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty good investment and certainty that the units will remain affordable. And then also set up the option that if a market rate builder wants more than 20 units an acre, then they come get their special use permit. And they talk to the Board of Adjustment about why, or, you know, why they want 20 units an acre and what they want to do. So that really isn't directly related to waivers, but as long as we were talking about dimensional requirements, I wanted to bring up something that we didn't address when we adjusted the review process for attached housing.
Okay. Jen?
So I have two questions. One is more clarifying and the other is a little more abstract. To clarify the way this is written, the idea is that moving multifamily by right up to say 16 for staff review, or if they commit to at least 50% of the units being affordable, moving it to 20 by right. There's kind of two by right statements. Is that the way to interpret this?
No, what I was really hoping is that you might settle on 20 units by right, and then a 50% density bonus for affordable housing, which would actually be 30 units per acre by right for affordable housing. And just because I wrote it as 50%, no wait, so I mean you could tweak that however you want. So, you know, in my mind, 20 and 30 are good numbers. If you guys aren't comfortable with that, feel free to say something different. In my experience, entire complexes tend to be affordable or market rate. They don't tend to mix them because the investors are interested in different things. So if you said you get an X% density bonus, if at least a certain percentage of your units are affordable, that will work. Just, I would say, be mindful that it is much more likely that the entire complex is going to be affordable. And so you might want to have you could set up some kind of structured system. The main thing is if you're going to allow the density bonus for affordability to be automatic, then it has to be fairly tightly or clearly constrained so that there's not staff discretion in implementing it. Because again, this is a staff level thing. It's got to be more like you read the ordinance and you apply it, not any kind of fuzziness or too much flexibility. I'm not sure if that helped or not.
No, it was, I was trying to figure out how the math works on that one. So that did clarify my main question. And then my second one is, I think I actually answered my second one when I think about it, which is how to consider some of this with some of the discussions for the new conditional zoning permits. I know you talked about them with special use and calling that out, but I think I understand how they separate out, but that intuitively they seem connected, that the density questions are mostly falling into the infill world.
Yeah, and in a conditional zone, you can allow an applicant to ask for anything and be granted anything. I mean, it's much like the waivers in the special use process that we had before. So I wouldn't worry too much about constraining the conditional district.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm trying to just think about what kind of strategy people would pursue, given what numbers if people want 30 units, they either have to commit to a number of, so let's say it's the market rate guys who want to go big, they would have to then go through conditional use, probably by default.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, sorry if you've already answered this. There's a statement in here in the commentary that says 20 acres is it's common, and then the height limit and parking requirements impact the ability to develop at a higher density. So if there were an affordable housing developer that wanted to go up to 30, what does that look like with, considering this comment that that is difficult to develop above that, I guess?
Then they're probably also going to want relief on the parking.
Okay.
And when we get to parking, I also suggest an automatic bonus for affordable housing there, because in some, depending on what income level the complex is looking at, the need for parking might be less. It also, depending on the mix of bedrooms. Right now, what we say is if your apartment complex has fewer than 100 units, you must provide 2 parking spaces for every apartment, regardless of whether it's 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms. So a 100-unit complex has 200 parking spaces. Well, if that's 100 one-bedroom units and they're affordable at 30% of income, that's 100 parking spaces that are going to be empty all the time.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, any additional, Frank?
I mean, it makes sense that we increase the density. It seems artificially low, Margaret, at this point. I mean, compared to our other folks around the triangle. And this really is only applying to land within the town's jurisdiction, which is not that great. Not a lot.
And the town also controls completely what can be zoned multifamily. And one of the beauties of this stepping back to the rezoning, getting away from the special use districts is the board can turn down a rezoning request for whatever reason they want. They don't have to have a reason. You don't have to make findings of fact and find a reason to turn it down. As Bob, our attorney, likes to say, you can turn it down because you don't like the guy's tie color. Of course, people don't wear ties anymore, but if you don't like the applicant's look or just the way he approaches the board, maybe he comes in just a little too aggressive or a little too shy or whatever it is, you don't have to grant a rezoning. That is a completely legislative decision. And if it's the wrong choice in the wrong spot, you turn it down at the rezoning standpoint, not at the development.
I want to clarify, we don't turn anything down because of how somebody looks here. That was how we do this.
It's really about inertia. This is getting people past, these developers past the 9 units per acre. It needs to be larger, and then it can be further controlled later. So I don't, does anyone have an idea of whether, so 20 is too much or too little? What I said that staff recommends at 20, and then a bonus on top of that if you're doing affordable housing.
So I would say that's a pretty big change from what people in this town are used to. And this is going to public hearing, but that's a big change from what people are used to. That's why there's so much contention about infill. It's the same kind of debate that people bring up in this town. And that's a question to consider, is which side of the citizenry do you listen to? Let's grow, let's take advantage of the people moving into this area, or do you try and how do you keep the small town charm? So that I don't think this is going to be a straightforward question. I think this is one that it's going to public hearing for, and people in both sides of town will have opinions on it.
This is the classic sprawl or density question that a lot of towns have had to deal with, though, and we're no different.
No, I think though you have no. I'm kind of curious of the results of the sustainability survey. I think this is a topic that probably came up in some comments from people on it. So I do think the public hearing, you're going to hear different opinions, different perspectives, and it's a question of how you want to see the town move forward. How do you handle this with the areas that this is going to be, or probably the Daniel Boone area? How do you handle that with Churton Street? Those are some of the questions people will probably ask. So I understand where staff is coming from with it, but it does get at the question that does seem to dominate a fair amount of the discourse in this town, and is a question for people to ask philosophically, where do you want to see things? So going from 9 to 20 or 30 is a drastic change. So that's one of those questions. It's going to go to a public hearing so the public can weigh in.
Elise?
Agreed. I was noting the difference between 9 and 20, and also looking at the table and seeing that right now our most dense apartment complexes in town is 15.4, and yet again that's still much lower than the 20. At the same time, I know that there's a lot of interest in Hillsborough, and I understand it. We live in this fantastic town. So how can we make space for folks to move in here and still keep that small town charm? I know this is a debate we continually come back to, but I'm kind of surprised by the jump from 9 to 20. It does seem like a big jump. I love the idea of using policy here to encourage the development of affordable housing. So I love having some sort of rule like, there's this 50% bonus. I'm not sure if that's quite the right number. I wonder about something a little smaller than that, because we are making this pretty big change already. So I guess I'm just sharing some of the reflections that I have, that it does seem like a big change. In my head, I'm trying to imagine, what does 20 units per acre look like? Is there a complex that we can go drive by in Chapel Hill to see it and get a sense of what that looks like? I'm just kind of curious. I'd like to get some sort of sense of what that is. I do think it makes a lot of sense to bump it up. I know that the average was listed as around 20 for the triangle, but I'm just aware that it is pretty different from where we are now. And I'm sure we're going to hear some different comments about it. But I do also just want to say, I love the idea of supporting the affordable housing through this option.
Okay. Before we get to you, Jen, does anyone else have any additional comments, concerns, anything along those lines?
Well, we can definitely find some examples.
Okay. Hooper, real quick. Jen,
Yeah,
just
I
one second.
would just say I'd probably fall on the density rather than sprawl line. So I think that this is a good initiative by staff. I think this makes a lot of sense. So.
Jen?
So I have more of a practical question about the implementation of this, thinking of the affordability issue and what I think last I heard is going on with Collins Ridge and their affordable development. And they came in, had the causal partnership, something came up with the site, and now they need to move it. How would that potentially be handled with the removal of waivers? Would they have to go through, I would guess, a review with the Board of Adjustment about a pretty substantial change, like what I think they're proposing, which is like moving it to a whole different part of the land plan?
Well, see, that it depends on what you do here, because they're actually looking to move it outside of Collins Ridge proper. So if they move it out of Collins Ridge proper onto other property, then it could be zoned multifamily. And if the density bonus is applied, then the new owner could develop at 30 units an acre by right, if the staff proposal was approved. If that doesn't happen and they say they were staying within their existing plan to just have it develop within the Collins Ridge parcel itself, it would end up being as an amendment to the master plan, the condition and the special use permit. The condition on the master plan always said 3 acres and up to 88 units. So I think if push came to shove and they only got 3 acres for the affordable housing and brought in a development plan that otherwise conformed, the density, there is no density limit in the RSU district. And so the land wouldn't be zoned multifamily and would not be subject to the 9 unit an acre. So they could bring in their proposal under that existing special use zone that is allowed to continue and modify, but not apply to new land. And it would be reviewed by the Board of Adjustment and could be approved without waivers. But at this point, it looks like they're going to move it off-site and need new land zoned to multifamily, because we can't add land to the RSU district because it's no longer available to us.
And so as a follow-up to that, let's say that Collins Ridge passed in our new kind of proposal world. And so this is the situation I'm trying to figure out, is if a developer comes in and gets approved of the units they want, gets the bonus for affordable housing, and then reneges on the affordable housing, what happens?
They're not allowed to build it.
Okay.
To Jen's point, I just want to point out that Collins Ridge has an affordable housing component, not because we require it in any way. So we currently don't require any affordable housing. It's more something that developers are using to incentivize their own projects. I also will kind of chime in a little bit on the market. My actual job title with the town is economic development planner. So I know a lot about market viability. And I'm also working with Stephanie Trubert on the sustainability plan, Jen. So some of this is going to come kind of through that. But the market viability right now is between 12 and 13 units per acre. And the sweet spot in the triangle is really around 16. So allowing that 20, I probably would not recommend going below 18 to 16 just because it's just not as attractive as a product based on land prices.
With some of the numbers I'm hearing, it sounds like 20 or even 30 is on the high side. Are we considering these numbers and intentionally putting them higher than we think most developers are going to choose to develop at? Because I know that you just said about 16 or so is the sweet spot for the triangle. You wouldn't want to do less than 18. So I'm just wondering about, and/or is this us predicting future growth down the way and we're making a big adjustment now so that we don't need to make another adjustment in 2 years? Just want to hear a little more thoughts around all that.
Or to piggyback on that, are we trying to be more competitive than the other towns?
I think right now we're just trying to respond to some market demands because that market demand is giving us a real affordability problem in our area. Margaret, what did you say when you first started the dense units per acre was?
6.
6. So we went from 6 to 9 and we haven't gone up at all. So we're not really keeping up.
And in terms of the affordability, so, since Collins Ridge is the kind of the only example we have, that approval is for 3 acres and they can put up to 88 units on it. Well, quickly doing the math, that's 30 units an acre. They need 30 units an acre to maximize the number of units. If we ratchet back the allowable density, we're not going to get the number of units. Or waivers have to stay in, and then they have to go through that protracted process to get the approval. And they might not have time in their schedule to do that because the funding for tax credits only comes once a year.
Okay. Any additional questions regarding this particular, Jen?
Not a question. I will just say though, the packet talks about other proposals, and if you do 16 and a 75% bonus for affordable, it comes out to 28 as the allowed units with the bonus at 16.
Yeah, the numbers that I threw out were just a starting point. I'm happy, I don't, there's no magic to any of those. Those are just numbers that I pulled out, knowing what I know that's going on in the background. And with a building height set at 45, if we don't adjust the building height, that's 3 stories. And that's it. And if there's no waiver to get any higher than that, then it's only ever going to be 3 stories. And so that's going to be another constraining factor to keep people from maximizing the number of units. And we require, I believe, a full acre, which could also always be adjusted for land to be rezoned to multifamily. I think Jen sometimes is talking about infill projects. It is very difficult to go into an existing residential neighborhood and find enough land to get zoned to multifamily. Where we're headed with this change is really more for any commercial that's changing or something that's new and on the boundary. Any kind of an infill project is much more likely to come in under the conditional zone that has yet to be drawn up. I just don't see somebody going through the process of trying to rezone 1 or 2 acres in a neighborhood to try and put 20 units on it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see it.
No, I think that was the clarification that needs to be highlighted to call those distinctions out.
Okay. Frank, did you raise your hand earlier? Nope. Okay. Elise, you went unmiked.
Yeah, I was considering asking. Margaret, you mentioned the 45-foot height maximum. Is that something, can you provide some context about what conversation there has been around the height maximum? And if that's something that, when you go upward, it really can change the character of a town. So I'm sure there's hesitance around that. And that's what I'm guessing, but I just would love to hear what discussion, if any, there has been around that within this conversation.
It's twofold. It's the appearance of it and the 3 floors, plus it also changes the construction method and it changes firefighting. Not that we can't get to a building that's more than 45 feet tall, because the UNC Hospitals is 90 feet tall, but and we can get there with the ladder truck. That's not a problem. But then it's a matter of where can the ladder truck sit to project out at the right angle so that it works, and that can cause issues. Once you go over the 3 floors, I'm almost positive you have to get into elevators, and that can get pricey. And it changes the building code that you build under. Jeff and Scott remind me if I'm wrong there, but I think that's also true. Once you go over the 3rd floor, it changes your building code. And so there's sort of, I'll call it magic, but it's not, there's a lot of outside factors that are kind of holding the line at 45 feet. We've not really had very many people ask to go above that, except for commercial buildings, and that's very rare.
Margaret, are you talking about the high-rise code?
I don't know what it's called. I just know that there's something that happens when you go over a certain number of feet, and that there's some sort of magic you can do with the 4th. If your 1st floor is like masonry, then you can go 3 floors of wood above that or something crazy, but it's not exactly recommended, but people do it.
Well, I know with the high rise, it's anything over 75 feet kind of kicks in a lot of basically anything over 75 feet is considered a high rise no matter what. Now what you're talking about might be like a podium issue where you can construct, those bottom 3 floors out of like reinforced concrete. Yeah, same way you see with like those big condo units where they put a bunch of retail on the lower floors, and then above that 2nd or 3rd floor, then they can go up to wood. That might be more what you're talking about.
This is what happens when you don't regulate the building code at the local level.
And I'd also guess like a lot of our utilities aren't going to be too keen on having big buildings getting really close to some of their wires.
And we also have the issue of water pressure. I mean, how are we going to get water all the way up to a 4th floor to have fire flow if there's sprinklers or just normal pressure in the units. It'd be great if it was at land that's down at the river, but if it's up, closer to 70 at a much higher elevation, that's going to be a tough sell on our water system.
I know with the water system, if it doesn't meet the flow test, then they have to install a separate pump. So I think that might be, way out of it. But I'm not the expert.
Okay. So given what we've talked about and that sort of thing, do we feel like we have something to work with here, or do we feel like we need to discuss it more, or man, we really want to chew on it before we send it anywhere? Or
and sort of what we're asking for tonight is clearer direction so that we can bring back a more firm proposal for you to look at next month. We're not necessarily asking you to go ahead and vote anything forward unless you want to, but give us enough direction so that we can craft something and you get another look at it next month before it hopefully would go to public hearing in October. And there's no requirement that it go to public hearing in October. I'm just trying to, it's more work. I'm trying to wrap things up to hand off to Shannon than anything else.
Yeah, we're just looking for a comfort level. And it sounds like what I'm hearing from you all is comfort with increased density, maybe not the whole way to 20, and maybe more of a boost for affordable housing. At least that's a comment that Jen made. She said, what about 75 instead of 50?
Yeah, I think this is going to be one that, even the note from staff even calls out Kathleen's goals, and affordability is a big issue, and it's not something people go necessarily to with the market, so you do have to find ways to regulate it to make it happen. I think whatever number you come up with is going to get discussed in the public hearing. You could throw 5,000 out there and it would still get discussed, or you could throw 5 and it still get discussed regardless.
speaking of discussed, Chris?
So I'm not a market analysis. I'm here just as a citizen with my own personal wants and needs and ideas. Can you, if the town of Hillsborough were to not remain market competitive in terms of price per acre, what is the long-term impact to the town if we were to have a lower density threshold than surrounding areas? Like what does that do long-term, I guess?
Good question.
That may be a long discussion, but just high level,
Shannon, do you field that one?
Well, we have a less likelihood to see any more apartments, probably. Townhomes may still be viable, although it's tougher. So you're going to see not as much diversity in your housing stock, and it will definitely impact affordability in a negative way.
Okay, Chris, does that answer your question?
Basically just increases disparity and equity and stuff like that. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay, Jen?
And with that, where are we with water capacity and what we're feasibly allowed to still develop?
I swear I just logged into Nextdoor right here. Like this feels like my Nextdoor feed right here.
It's interesting that you asked that. The town board is going to spend a lot of time talking about wastewater capacity on Monday night, the 23rd. And we expect there to be a lot of discussion. We did just recently, complete the expansion of the reservoir. So I will say that we are good on water capacity. But now we are taking a deep dive on wastewater to see what that also looks like.
Yeah, and I got Marie on that, so that will be a long discussion.
Yes.
Okay. So, any other questions, comments, concerns? Does anyone feel like we're ready to throw numbers around, or again, where are we at right now in terms of clarification for staff on how we feel? Shannon's wrap up of, it sounds like we're moving towards density, but it sounds like, and we like affordability. Sounds like maybe we still have a number that we want to figure out.
I think the number will get hashed out in the public hearing.
Sure.
I
Does
think
anyone
I
want
can
to?
Put any number in there and it'll get discussed.
I agree. I think we should just go with the 20 and 30 and let it see how it plays out in the public hearing.
I have a note too that I think Elise asked for some example of nearby apartment complexes in other jurisdictions and what their densities were.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great if you have an example of 20 and an example of 30. I agree with the idea of keeping those numbers simple and as they are right now in the example, and we'll see how the discussion goes. But it'd be nice to have a visual for what that is.
Okay.
In
Wonderful.
addition to like newer examples, are there existing, 15 to 20-year-old neighborhoods that have kind of the same makeup as well? I know there's probably a lot in Chapel Hill or the newer areas, but just the long-term impact of that example, perhaps.
Well, I've actually got they might not be as useful visuals, but I've got a whole book that's called Visualizing Density, and it has pictures from all over the country of neighborhoods at different densities. And so if the pictures in the book don't help, the neighborhood might be specific enough where I could then do Google Earth and get you some graphics. But yeah, we can definitely work on finding more examples so that you have an idea, but certainly want to get you some that are close enough to where you would feel like you could go drive through them and experience them, which is different than looking at photographs. So we'll try and do both.
Okay. Always love a good picture book. All right. So with that, we do need something though, right? We need to, no, we don't. No. All right, good. I'll get it one day, not today. All right. So that is 6.3 dimensional requirements on waivers side. Do we want to talk about buffers? Do we want to jump into that?
Sure. So the two things that folks most often want, or the things that most often cause issues with buffers is whether utilities or stormwater can coincide or how they coincide with or impact buffers. So the board may remember that we recently made a lot of changes in the buffers to create, rather than just like 3 or 4 types of buffers, then there's 3 or 4 different ways to meet each one of those types of buffers. And so that created a lot of flexibility that we haven't really seen play out on very many lots yet. But stormwater tends to want to go where it wants to go, which is on the low part of the lot. And sewer is the same way. It wants to go in the low part of the lot. Water is much more flexible because it's under pressure. But the 2 sections that I highlighted in your packet, which talks about, utility corridors are not to be in the buffer and stormwater control mechanisms are discouraged from being in the buffer, which is not terribly specific language. And it's these 2 sections that we think need some work to make this section more viable without waivers. And then I just put in there an option is like, okay, so we could continue to try and tweak and adjust and make buffers work. Or we can be like, what in the world are we doing with buffers? Is there another way to solve this desire of separating land uses that maybe shouldn't be next to each other, or mitigating the impacts of uses that are next to each other that maybe need a little bit more spacing? And so there might be another way to solve it and not call it a buffer, but call it designate a certain density of landscaping in a setback when you've got commercial next to residential or something like that. Just a different way of achieving the same goal, because once you record a lot and designate an area as a buffer, the intent section says, thou shalt not enter this buffer and shall not do anything. It is a no-touch, natural, leave it alone zone. And so that's a pretty rigid statement. It's pretty rigid, doesn't give us much flexibility, much way to help folks work what they're trying to do. And so there might be a different way to get at that. Many years ago, we used to let the buffer live on the private parcel, especially in residential subdivisions. So those who live in Beckett's Ridge on Woodbury Drive had this mandated land use buffer in their backyard. Well, did the homeowners ever get told that there was a buffer there and that they weren't supposed to cut down any of the trees in their backyard? No. And then our phone would ring, my neighbor's taking down all their trees in their backyard. And so then we said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. In residential subdivisions, buffers have to be in the open space. And so now we have these long strips of open space around the perimeters of subdivisions where there's not to be any development. It serves the purpose, but it also means that there aren't sizable open spaces where kids can be kids in a non-structured sort of way, or where people can be people in a non-structured sort of way, because they're meeting their buffer requirement. They're meeting their open space requirement by giving us their buffers. Non-residential, the buffer lives on the lot just because there's more control about how the lots develop. And so I'm happy to try and attack this either way. I don't have, if I had a suggestion, I would have put them in the packet. I really don't have a suggestion on how to fix this. But I just wanted to throw out there that there is another way to look at this if the board wanted to look at that one more than continuing this buffer thing that we seem to keep tweaking and adjusting and don't ever quite get there with it.
Okay. Margaret, do we have comparables from other towns? Like, I mean, do they get stuck into bufferings?
I honestly haven't looked. I don't know.
Okay. Jen?
I know I'm of the mindset to leave it alone with all the other, with the change to the ABCD type buffers that we did last time. I think I've only heard one case, and that was on Board of Adjustment, come up and discuss it since we put that in. And it was because they wanted to do, they basically didn't want any buffers almost. It was the one we denied the waiver for the variance for from that group on board. So I'm of the mind, I don't think we've had it out enough to collect enough data on the new types that we put in that flexibility around there at this point. That's my take on the buffer world.
Okay. Does anyone else have any input? Okay. I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads and sidelong glances, so I don't think we have a whole lot of input on this one, Margaret. It sounds like one of our board members thinks we need more time on it.
Well, maybe we can all just read those two highlighted sections again and see if maybe one or two word changes that clarify how much flexibility staff might have to interpret it is enough to at least try out for an extended period with the options that already exist and see if that isn't enough.
Oh yeah, no, the stormwater and utility definitely play around with. I'm talking about the other discussion with the ABCD versus other alternative ways of buffering. No, stormwater and utility, those we do hear about, and I'm trying to think of, I know the car dealership and pause in Healing Paws, I think we both had to deal with these on where the utilities are in the buffer, and we always grant the waiver.
Right, so we might just need to look for a way for staff to be able to grant some flexibility under certain circumstances.
I mean, I always love looking at the other towns and just seeing what they're doing just in terms of the buffer requirements and that sort of thing, just to get a perspective, because I mean, they've got to be dealing with the exact same issue where they're trying to preserve the natural space and that sort of thing. I don't know. I'd be interested to see if someone's gotten the silver bullet. So, okay. So do we want to table that for right now while staff takes a look at the utility corridors and stormwater controls and comes back with firmer language on changes that they think might address the waiver issue?
Yeah, we'll take another look at it to try to solve those two things and see if we can't find some other examples from our neighbors that give us some suggestions.
Okay, Shannon, your eyebrows are doing the Percy thing. Is there any additional input or changes or suggestions for us to take a look at? No?
No, I'm sorry, I have expressive eyebrows. I was a site plan reviewer in the town of Morrisville for many years, and I don't remember this ever coming up. So I'm glad you brought up. I wonder what they're doing there, because I was just thinking to myself, like, I don't remember this ever being an issue. So I wonder what was different there.
Okay.
That'll be a good reference.
Perfect. All right, let's see here. So we talked about buffers, that was 6.5. So 6.7 design standards.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that all the changes that we just made are sufficient and that we really should kind of start holding the line on these and not make further adjustments to those until we've lived with them for a little bit longer.
Okay. I love doing nothing. Landscaping parking lot.
And so this is the subject of our waiver previously this evening, that 5-foot landscape area between the parking and the building. We could certainly become more flexible when it's on the non-street facing facade or the non-primary entrance facade, you know, and maybe back off that, or maybe we just hold the line. I mean, that's, I'm looking for direction from the board on how strongly you feel about this.
I would prefer hold the line, but I'm a bit curious with the removal of the waiver option, if that's going to make people more attentive. I think that's what's kind of going to happen.
So I want to clarify this hold the line thing. So with the hold the line, what would we have done with the waiver request that had come in tonight? Would we have requested them to bash the okay?
Well, if waivers didn't exist, staff would have told them that they built something not to plan and they need to remove it and fix it at their expense.
So I keep getting this mixed message from staff, which is just that in the packet it says specifically, we don't think it's a big deal. But then I get this line about like we need to hold the line and that sort of thing. So I'm getting mixed messages about what we should be doing here as a board, like in terms of, you know, there's a big cost that's associated with doing this and we got to be flexible, but also like we should hold the line and make them rip out 4 feet of concrete to put in 6 petunias or whatever it is. So,
well, I mean, it's because it's so far after the fact that at this point it's ridiculous to come. I mean, they've left the site, they got their conditional CO, they had the ability to ask for the waiver. Otherwise, they would have still been on site. We would have pointed it out to them and they would have had the capacity. They wouldn't have been happy about it, but they could have fixed it when they were there. It's ridiculous now to make them come back 2 months later and dig it up and take it out because it's going to cost twice as much. I mean, it would have been expensive to fix it before, but you do that once or twice and folks don't forget to check their approved plans and communicate with staff.
So if this were to happen in the future and they're done with the project, I guess, what is there a drop dead date after the end of a project where we think it's acceptable to hold the line at, I guess?
No, because we knew this was coming, you know, while they were still on site. We require an as-built drawing before we allow them their certificate of occupancy to go in the building. And so we usually know before this, but this was a simple site, so we hadn't been out checking it on a regular basis. But you know, it's just they were pushed up against they were behind when they started this project and needed to deliver the building on time. And so they needed their CO, they needed everything. And had this been on the front, staff would have had a very different opinion about whether it needed to be torn out or not.
Frank?
There we go.
Sorry. So this is to Margaret and Shannon. Isn't it really not our concern about the monetization of the repair or the remediation? It's really that's really not our concern. It could be $1, it could be tens of thousands of dollars if it was done incorrectly, right? So that's really not part of our consideration. I get it that there might be, like in this case, say you came to you before that CO or conditional CO, and it comes back and says, well, it's going to be about $15,000. It's like, too bad, so sad. You know, you should have come to us prior, et cetera. So I almost asked that question tonight. Like, have you monetized this? Have you made a decision based on that? And I guess it really wouldn't matter to us, because it's really, if we said you need to rectify it, you need to rectify it. Are we looking at it the same way? It's like, you don't take that into consideration with staff, do you? Like, how much?
No, we really don't. There's only 1 or 2 sections of the ordinance that actually allow us to consider the cost. Normally, we're not supposed to consider the cost at all.
Okay.
And especially in granting relief. Only when it's an existing nonconformity can we take a nonconformity that existed before the ordinance came.
In this case,
or some.
Right. In this case, we're just going to be chasing somebody who's already left the site. And they could have dragged their heels. They could have not done it. It could have been a legal challenge. Is that really what the aftermath would have been if we held the line tonight? I'm just curious with Chris.
Yeah, I think if it's hard, with our history of waivers, if waivers didn't exist and they were having to come in and get a variance, there's no way they qualify. No way they qualify for a variance.
Right.
So they would be tearing it out. But we have a long history of waivers where they're always granted. There's very few waivers that haven't been granted. So that just sets us up for, well, let's grant one more. It's really hard to start holding the line when that mechanism exists.
And then I could just claim, well, you granted this other waiver and this other waiver, and why can't I get my waiver?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's great for me to understand going forward. The need to kind of root it out.
Well, let's get rid of the waivers.
Right.
Well, and I mean, we've had a number of after the fact waivers from particular developers and particular projects over the years. And some are, this one probably would never have passed with the new rules. In thinking historically of some of these cases, a lot of the ones on 515 probably wouldn't have been able to be upheld. Maybe the only one that would through a variance would be that Elfin Pond one with the retaining wall and the surveyor missurveyed something. That's probably the only one that would have stayed up if we get rid of waivers. And again, that it'll be very interesting to see how much more conscientious the developers get without them present.
I was just going to say that I'm a big fan of landscaping and plants, and so that's what I feel like we all have our little topics that we are passionate about, and that's mine. And so, again, tonight this came up, and this has come up in previous waiver requests as well. And I do feel like we've set the precedent that if you have a waiver request, it's generally going to be approved. And so folks come in and we can ask questions and we can push back. And, I asked my question of what would it take to do this? I knew it would be expensive. I knew we would end up approving it, but I still, the most that we can really do is push back and say, well, you should have come in and, what would it take, and talk us through that. But I feel like it would be helpful to not have that waiver option as often, because I feel like it does get overly used and potentially abused, because it is just the standard of practice at this point that if there is a mistake, if there is a challenge, they can do a waiver. And most of the time we might hem and haw and ask some questions, but ultimately we'll approve it. But we have these town ordinances in place because we have a particular vision for what Hillsborough is going to look like. So it's appealing to think about making it more consistent, being more consistent in our enforcement and expectation around that, and then setting that standard, because exactly as I think Margaret said, if this mistake happens a couple of times and they have to fix it and it costs them 15, 50, who knows how many $1,000s, they're going to remember it versus, you know, honestly, I was just caught up in trying to make sure that we were meeting our deadlines and moving things forward. And I totally forgot about the landscape 5-foot requirement. I think that, you know, there would definitely be an adjustment, but I think eventually folks would just do a better job of making sure that they're following the rules all the way through instead of knowing worst case scenario, if they forget something, there's this workaround.
Jeff?
Well, I had a kind of a similar question to what Elise was talking about is, you know, Orange County does building code enforcement, I believe, and then, you know, you guys are in charge of planning and zoning. I mean, how do you guys typically handle enforcement where, you know, with building, you know, with the building itself, you know, the super old coffer inspection, that kind of thing. But, you know, do you guys ever, you know, go out there periodically to check, or is it, you know, I mean, I that question in regards to like, you know, the TRC stuff and, you know, how you guys go about it in the future.
Yeah, so we have to work really closely with Orange County, and it's actually not all that uncommon for us to have a conflict of some type. So like, let's say a certain lighting fixture was shown on the exterior of a building, but building inspections needed moved over 3 feet. But the site plan doesn't show it, or the architectural elevations show it differently. Stuff like that's usually pretty easy to resolve. When we have conflicts that can't easily be resolved, we usually meet on site, but that requires someone to actually flag that there's an issue they can't resolve versus just trying to make something up and asking for forgiveness later. So that's usually how we handle it. Meeting on site, or it can be as easy as a few emails and a bulletin drawing just showing a revised elevation. And Chris, I'm sorry if we're giving you mixed signals. I would say that with the waivers, it feels a little icky, right? So like we're as staff, we're saying like this waiver, not the end of the world, not a big deal. It's on the back of the building, like they're trying to be ADA accessible, but it does feel kind of yucky to tell somebody, well, you have to tear this out because this isn't what we approved.
To quickly before I let Jen go, I mean, so a lot of these folks on the board are newer and that sort of thing. And so we do look a lot to staff in terms of just, you know, historicals and that sort of thing. And so reading through the packet, staff has no problem with this. And then, you know, afterwards there's, you know, these problems that have come up, and historically we've always given waivers. Well, historically, like staff has said, we have no problem with these waivers. So it feels definitely like a little bit of a whiplashy kind of thing. I absolutely get that we want to be consistent and so on and so forth. But, you know, we're running up against a monolith of the UDO and all these other things that we have versus, you know, come out and rip out 4 feet worth of concrete or whatever the case may be. Like there's just, I don't know, there definitely feels like a central conflict here. Jen, I apologize. I cut you off there. Go for it.
No, you didn't. I was probably waving at my dog who's been coughing all night.
Gotcha. Okay.
Coughing finally.
Jeff.
Sorry, I was just going to ask another follow-up question. You know, it seems like with the last applicant is, you know, there was that conflict with the door, which is probably the fact that, you know, it was swinging in the wrong direction because it's supposed to swing in the path of egress. So that threw, you know, a kink in the way that the ramp was designed and all that kind of stuff. But
the grading was the first thing. The grading was off by like 4 feet, so they had to put in a ramp, and then the door was backwards, and then they put the ramp in the backwards way, or got rid of the shrubberies. Yeah, there was a lot. Sorry, go ahead.
Does Orange County ever come out and, you know, if they see something, do they notify you guys, or is it purely, you know,
the county is only doing building code enforcement. I don't know that they look at the site plan. And you know, honestly, I wish we could get out to construction sites a couple times throughout the process, but really we don't. We hold the pre-con and we tell them, if you make any change, if you think about making a change, call us first, and here's your permit, go have a good time. And then bring us an as-built when you're ready. to be done. Now, on many sites, they call us early for when they're finished, when they're not really finished. So I would say, you know, on 30 to 50% of sites, we make 2 or 3 final visits to try and get to the CO. But I can't say that we do that on every site, and we're certainly not out there at the time when it would have been easiest to find this and fix this one. And then sometimes things don't show up until the as-built when you find out that they're off by 3 inches. But that's when our 10% rule can often come into play.
I'm gonna not lie here and say I forgot which one we were on. Were we on design standards or were we on landscaping on this one?
Landscaping.
Landscaping. Okay, good. Yep. Okay. Does anyone have any additional questions in regards to the landscaping waiver that we had tonight? Or just in general?
So I'm kind of hearing hold the line on the 5 foot. And not offer any changes to avoid future waivers. Let's see how it goes.
Okay. Which puts us to 611 lighting.
Yes, and so there's a lot here, and a lot of the previous lighting waivers had to do with the pole or fixture height, and we did fix that. What the ones that are left are about the parking lots have to be 1 foot candle of light. And I know that's an odd measurement that people aren't familiar with, across the entire parking lot. And so then Duke or the lighting engineer lays out this grid of numbers that tell you what the light intensity is where 2 lines cross. We don't have any standard for how that lighting study is done. We just tell them they have to provide us a lighting plan with those intensities. And so I checked a couple of them, and you know, the density of that grid is not always the same. I'm sure it's tied to the size of the site, and that a bigger site, the grid is bigger and spaced out further. And then on a smaller site, it's tighter. And the smaller the site, the much more likelihood you're going to end up with a much brighter site in general, to avoid having any area that's not at the 1 foot candle. And so my favorite example, because I look out my office window at it, and usually it's dark out, or it's not usually dark out, but the parking lot at the condos across the street, that parking lot is very bright. And that's because they didn't want any section that wasn't 1 foot candle. And so then across the site, it's like 2. Well, that's twice as bright. That's really bright by comparison. And then we also have the limit about nothing more than 15 foot candles, which isn't really a number that I pulled wholly out of the air, but it was close. Because doing some reading about how much light, so when you look at a light source and then you look back to something's dark, how bright is too bright to impact your ability when you look back to the dark and actually be able to see things. And so I feel okay about that 15 foot candle, that 15 foot candle is really bright. And that if you then come back to a roadway that may or may not be at 1 foot candle, your eyes are going to take a minute to adjust. And in that minute, you might miss something running out or being on the side of the road where it's not supposed to be. And so basically, I agree that staff needs to work on better standards for a lighting plan. We probably need to understand a little bit more the difference between a lighting plan and then a lighting survey when a project is finished, and whether there is wisdom in actually asking for one of those as well, which I have some reservations about, but I'm happy to be persuaded. And then, do we want to work more on this 1 foot candle, 15 foot candle, providing some flexibility about how we say that 1 foot candle is applied across the site? And again, I know it was a lot to read, but the Walmart parking lot is not necessarily at 1 foot candle. And I know some people feel like that's dark. When they're out there, they feel like it's a little bit dark, doesn't really feel comfortable. Under your average convenience store, gas station canopy, you're probably well over 20 or 30 foot candles. Really bright. I just kind of wanted to, those are the only two that I really know that I wanted to provide some context for of what is too bright. And just a reminder that this lighting does not come into play at all for street lights. This is for parking lot lights and for building entrances and that kind of stuff. We do not apply this to street lighting along residential or commercial streets. It's just
by Duke.
It's all Duke anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, almost every commercial site contracts with Duke. Not everyone, but almost everyone does, because they don't want to get in the bucket truck and change their own light fixtures out.
So the only way staff has to measure this sort of thing is the light survey. There's no tool that staff has on hand to measure the brightness of a.
We do
beyond your
have
iPhone.
a light meter.
Okay.
It's old. I would not guarantee that it is calibrated or in any way otherwise defendable, but I have certainly used it. Spent way too many nights in various people's backyards and so forth, measuring light. That example of the folks in Beckett's Ridge is not a joke. I went over to their houses a couple of nights to measure the light on their back porches coming from Hampton Point. I've measured the light coming off the parking deck downtown in various backyards. And so, yeah, that's fun times, going out and measuring light. Fun times.
Jen?
So 2 things. 1, I very quickly Googled, you can get light meter apps for your iPhone.
Ooh, there we go.
So that can make that cheaper. But more importantly, I think with this one, I would like staff to do some research, because I'm wondering if there's a way, instead of talking about it with foot candles, it's discussed more in what the types of fixtures are, so that LEDs, and is there some way to address it with technology that will de facto handle all the measurements for you and get it closer to something to get us a little closer to dark skies type regulations. I think everybody was on board with that. But instead of thinking about it with the foot candle piece, is there a way to discuss it with the technology used, or codifying, use the LEDs, use the bafflers on things, stuff like that? I don't know if that's possible or not.
Yes, Duke has offered to review our ordinance, and I have tried to understand the bug rating, which is backlighting, uplighting, and glare, BUG. Then they have a number for all their different types of fixtures, and it's just not as easy as foot candles are. I mean, foot candles are easy. Foot candles are easy. You give me that grid thing, or you draw out the topos. I can interpret that all day long. Understanding the bug ratings and getting that information is not so easy.
Margaret, when Cornelis looked at the waivers for lighting, how many do we come in that are use-based? So I remember doing site plan review, gas stations, ATMs and banks, and car dealers want to like light places up like the 4th of July. Like so bright. Are we seeing any other uses that want that really bright light?
No, it's more a matter of when the use gets to be on a smaller lot, in order to meet that 1 foot candle standard, they're ended up brighter, or they might have trespass issues at their boundary. It's not usually that they actually want, the car dealership is the only one who really wanted. And you know, when we get a new convenience store, we'll have that. But no, it's not too much use related. But you know, as we suggested, we could easily do a use related exemption if the board was so inclined, or a use standard that gave some more flexibility. Folks might remember that we gave the car dealership a fair amount of flexibility to go quite a bit brighter to a certain time period. I don't remember what it was. Sometimes those can be a little bit harder to enforce, but
Jeff, Scott, do you have any particular input on lighting? Anything along those lines you wanted to throw in?
Actually, I have a question. I just noticed a couple of days ago that there's some really, really bright blue lights on South Churton Street. There's a couple of them, not many. And there's one over here by the church. What are those? They're like
those are LEDs that are fixing to fail. So when you see the lights start to turn purple,
yeah,
those are ones that we need to report to Duke. And I think I was talking to our public works manager today, and he said Stephanie had about 30 of them for him. So he was going to have the guys come in early one morning and just ride around and look for ones that are malfunctioning. But the purple ones that you see, the one at the end of my street is turning purple. That's an LED fixture that is failing.
I totally thought that the Village Diner had gotten Duke to shine it purple on their parking lot because they thought it looked cool. Did not realize it was a light failure.
Okay. But in regards to the lighting ordinance and that sort of thing, do you, either Jeff or Scott, have any kind of, other than the purple?
No, I don't have anything. I think when we did the car dealership, we went 12 rounds on that. I think it probably scrambled my brain a little bit, but I think everything in there is good enough to talk about in the public forum.
Okay. Okay, well, Margaret, I think we need additional illumination on this topic, so I guess you guys will do a little bit of research and get back to us on it. Do we want to go ahead and move on to 613 parking? I think we can go ahead and just fix that right now, right? Like, let's just knock that out. Let's get it done.
Yeah, so I think we do need to double check that we've got good alignment with the design standards in the parking. Make sure that that's squared away. I thought we had that, but my plan reviewer says not so much. So maybe we need to go through that with him and make sure we've got it squared. And then was just the suggestion here about whether we wanted to allow a small percentage of flexibility and remove the language about the 25%, and then allowing attached housing to go per bedroom regardless of the development size, and as two minor tweaks to sort of get us through, because it's always that people want more parking, and I don't think they need it. I'm not really aware of any place that has real parking constraints in their parking lot unless it's a medical office or a daycare center during drop off.
Yeah. Okay. So the flexibility, the 5 to 10% thing, can you walk me through that a little bit? Like, does that just mean staff can allow additional 5 to 10 on?
Yeah, that maybe we set that the math in the table is the minimum, or is the ideal, both the minimum and the maximum, but allow applicants to be 5% above or below, or 10% above or below. Although I guess actually we can do 10% to some extent. Automatically, but to just to give them some flexibility so that with rounding or with they just had room to squeeze in one more, or they couldn't quite get the last one in, that it would still be acceptable. We would need to spend some time working on exactly how that would work out.
Okay.
Apply it to a few sites, see what it would look like.
Margaret, are you thinking you could increase by 10% or decrease by 10%?
That's a 20% swing.
Yeah, that's 20% swing. That seems like a lot, but 5% doesn't seem like it's quite enough. So I'm not quite sure that I'd have to apply it to a couple of sites because, you know, the bigger the site, the more that is going to impact. So
I think what most recently in development requests or like preliminary designs, what I've seen is like visitor parking for multifamily. Them wanting to have some type of a handful of spots here and there for like when people have people over. And then also curbside. That's the new thing. They want to have their parking for the guests, but they also want to have this like separate dedicated curbside that might put them over a little bit.
yeah, this is more for, not so much for multifamily specific, but for all developments. So I'm not sure what you're seeing from the commercial developments.
Just curbside pickup is most of it. It's for run in, run out, or having employees run stuff out to people and having dedicated spaces for that.
And just confirm this doesn't include any kind of loading or unloading zones or anything along those lines. I know it wasn't parking discussion, but for the Colonial Inn, there was the loading and unloading zone issue and that sort of thing.
Well, the inn also had a weird parking request too, where their cars are all at Sam Coleman's law office.
Right.
Right. Yeah, they have offsite parking. But for like a standard, like say a new restaurant or something that maybe is built up on the street, they might want one or two, what Shannon is saying, places for, you know, just trying to think through about curbside service and how we do that. So we might just need to spend some time thinking about how commercial activities look now. Because I have a feeling that curbside service is not going away because people love it.
And having been stuck trying to get from the post office when you've got 3 cars lined up for Antonia's, it ain't fun. The only thing I was going to bring up on parking was, I know that I like the idea of doing further review because this is one where the times we've been asked for waivers swing both ways. I think Bellevue Mill wanted to reduce their spots and the little school wanted to increase them. And in both cases, they were like over 10%, but we're only talking about 3 spaces in one case, I think.
Yeah, and so maybe we go with a flat number that they can go 5 over or 5 below and not do it on a percentage. You know, we'll just have to look at it and see. We'll have to run some sites and look at it and see what the impact would be.
I think the flat number makes a bit more sense. Jeff?
With the parking, is there any differentiation between different types of uses right now in terms of like parking counts? You know, I'm thinking a really good example of, you know, in Cameron Village, or the Village as they call it now, in Raleigh, you know, that place has 1,000 different uses. And if you go over there at lunchtime, you know, there's just people coming and going. It's like, well, how am I going to find a spot? But, you know, there's always people coming and going. It's never, you know, you can always find a spot. It's never like, you know, they're in there for a concert, coming out for you know, people are always coming and going. So I think that playing conservative on that makes a lot of sense. And then I guess the other question, is there ever any kind of particular incentive or sort of flexibility if there's a site where they have street parking? Obviously, we don't have a lot of, you know, the town is pretty small in terms of like urban footprint, but are there any incentives for that or flexibility for that if, you know, less on site and there's street parking, I'm going to augment it?
Yes, so we have a long table that ties up pretty closely with the permitted use table so that each type of use has its own math on how you calculate the number of parking spaces it needs. And then we have, so a business office has a different parking standard than a warehouse, has a different standard than a medical office, has a different standard than a school. And then in the central commercial district, which is primarily where the on-street parking is, we've said that based on the inventories that we've done, that quote unquote, there's enough parking downtown. That's what we've said. And then, so you can change out uses, and we're not doing any math about parking for businesses to change out. So all of the restaurant change out to there's that, from office to restaurant, that's a different math, but we're not going to count the parking spaces for that because we've said there's enough parking in downtown. But if you build an addition to a building in the central commercial zone of more than 500 square feet, then we want you to figure out where then you need to start adding to the parking supply, because you've built 500 square feet, and do it that way. Or if your building has a basement that's never been used for the public, and now you're going to renovate it and use it for the public, and it's more than 500 square feet, you've got to find some parking. So yeah, we pretty much let downtown alone and say, if you're zone central commercial, you don't need to provide new parking if you're changing your use around. But if you're building an addition, then you need to.
Okay. That answer your question? Okay. Jen?
And just to clarify after that comment, Margaret, potentially moving forward, if a situation like that came up where there's an addition and I think this already kind of happens this way, or use changes, that would go to the Board of Adjustment moving forward about variances probably, right?
We've never granted a parking variance.
Okay. So that's what I'm thinking about, is that I can't remember which board it was that heard the online auto sale dealership out by Meadowlands, which was a question about use change and parking triggered. It must have been this one then.
That was because it became a conditional use permit. They didn't, I don't remember them having a parking issue.
I feel like it was the way they wanted to use, it was storage of the cars. That's right.
Storage of cars.
That's what it was. So
Okay.
yeah, that's my question, is if those uses come in, where's that? And there's no place to put it. What's the avenue for a person to seek recourse? And we might grant a parking variance one day. Who knows?
Yeah, or the ordinance has flexibility for them to find an offsite arrangement.
Okay. Do we have any clarification for staff in regards to the parking in terms of percentages, or in terms of flat rates, or in terms of, do we have strong feelings?
I think, and I think Margaret probably agrees, that there's probably some more research to be done on this one.
Say that again, Jen, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I know we've talked about a couple of different proposals with percentages or going to flat rates, so there's probably a little more stuff to look into here.
I would think that, so but for clarity, in terms of the flexibility, I mean, just, are we feeling more towards the percentages, or are we feeling more towards the flat rates, or is there any kind of clarity we can give? No.
Well, we can pull like 10 sites that are a variety of size, from, an acre to, 10 acres, and, a heavy use to a light use, and see what it would look like if we did it
A 5 or 10%.
a percentage versus a flat number.
I think that
Why can we not do both? Like percentage up to a certain number and then flat rate?
You could do that too, and that might be what looks better when we find some numbers.
Okay.
Yep, totally do that.
All right. Well, then it sounds like we're square on parking. What I'd like to suggest is just to take a pause on the remainder. I know we've only got we still got 2 here, and then we also have the conditional zoning districts discussion. Do we want to take a pause on the remaining 2 and try to touch on the conditional zoning districts, or do we want to try to finish this out and then table the conditional zoning districts for the next time? What would we like to do? Specifically Margaret and Shannon, because this is affecting your ability to do your next steps, or whatever the case may be. Do you feel like you have enough to work on here, or do we need to focus on one thing or the other?
Well, I think we've got enough to work on, but the sidewalk issue with the trees is pretty clear. We had tried to solve that before, so I mean, there's only, we can work on that. The tree preservation is a little bit more in depth, and maybe that one just isn't quite ready to go in October. And we could keep working on the conditional zonings as we've talked about. Nobody's really given us a lot of feedback on if we were headed in the right direction on that, but we could just see how much we get done in the next month and bring it back, and maybe they'll be ready, maybe they won't.
Okay.
And I feel that, again, with Stephanie and Shannon working on the sustainability results, that's going to definitely feed the tree preservation one. And then probably the same with the districts. And
Right, and that's what we, for tree preservation in particular, it's more a matter of, is there a Band-Aid that we can apply to get us through the next 18 months until that plan is done, and then do something more robust?
Yeah, and I don't want to undercut anyone if anyone was really looking for the tree preservation discussion to. But if we feel like we've got enough to work with here, I'm also cognizant that we're marching into our second hour of that sort of thing, and I'm just looking at some faces here. So, okay, if we're feeling okay, Margaret, if you've got things to work with and on and that sort of thing, then do we feel confident in moving on to? I mean, do you want to address any of the preliminary discussion on the conditional zoning requests, or do we want to keep on keeping on with that?
I'm satisfied that we're still kind of wrapping our brain around exactly what it's
Working
going
through
to
it.
look like and what sort of application requirements we're going to suggest. So I don't mind putting a pin in that for next time.
Okay, well, I will use my dictatorial command as the board chair here to demand that we move on to 6A, which is updates from the Board of Adjustment person, which I believe is Jen Sykes.
we didn't meet.
That's a good update. All right, Jen B, or 6B, excuse me, is Parks and Rec, and that is Lisa, who's not here.
Right, and they did not have a quorum when they met this week.
Okay, this is a good. This is being really exciting. 6C, staff.
I don't know that I have much other than to say, for those who have worked with Justin Snyder, he is leaving us. He is becoming the planning director in Graham.
Oh.
He'll leave on the 27th, and we're interviewing tomorrow for planning technicians. So those who may remember Taylor, who's been gone for 2 years, we're going to try and finally fill that position. And then we'll advertise for the planner position. So there'll be new faces and new names kicking around the planning department. And slowly but surely, Shannon is taking the reins.
Perfect. Okay. I think I know 7 or 8 people who have experience with the planning board. So if you need any of them or anything along those lines, I think that counts. All right. So that means we are out of 6C and into, I think it's 7. And I think that is adjournment, which means we need a motion. Move to close. We don't need a second. I think we are done for tonight. Margaret, thank you so much for your time and working through those with us. And Shannon, always a pleasure. And thank you, everybody else. So
Thanks, you
good night,
guys.
everyone.
Thanks,
I
y'all.
gotta find my dog.
Have a good-
Bye.